Hello, and welcome to the November 2020 edition of Trustlines Community Call. I'm Tadu. I'm the Community and Communications Manager at BrainBot, contributing to the Trustlines network. Today, joining me are some of the other contributors and some guests we have. So, let's do a quick intro round with Andreas and Elisa starting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andreas. I'm doing project management related stuff for BrainBot for what we contribute to Trustlines.
Hi, I'm Elisa. I'm doing research and business development at BrainBot and also working on Trustlines.
And Daniel and Tomas, you want to give a quick intro on what you're working on?
Yes, I'm Daniel. I'm based in Caracas, Venezuela. We are very excited because we will be running Trustlines projects down here. Thomas, you want to go?
Yes, hi, I'm Tomas. I'm in charge of communications for this pilots. I'm in charge of making communications more humane and humans more communicative. So I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And today we're going to quickly start with the latest developments in the ecosystem, where Aliza is going to present her work on some real-world use cases, and then we'll hear more from Daniel and Tomas. So take it away, Aliza.
Cool. All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. So we've got these on the website now. But this is just, we put together some examples for how you could use Trustlines in the real world. And I'm going to go through them really quickly. So just a note, these are sort of different ways that you can, they're not just different ways to use Trustlines, they're also different ways to frame its use. So not all of these are mutually exclusive. So for example, let's start with bill splitting. You could use Trustlines for splitting bills with your friends or with people in your friend circle who you might not know personally. And we think this is really a fun way to, or a less painful way to split the bills with a lot less social awkwardness. And you could basically do bill splitting in combination with pretty much any other use case. Then we've got the People's ATM. So this is a pretty cool way to use Trustlines is to use it like use your friends as an ATM machine because the debts on Trustlines are recorded very securely. You could use it just like you might use an ATM, but you don't actually need ATMs anymore if you can just pay your friend over Trustlines and then receive cash from them. The cool thing is that, again, you don't just have to be using it with your close trusted friends. You could also use it with anyone else in the Trustlines network who's connected to you, who's willing to use Trustlines like that. So one of my favorite use cases is probably time banking or time credits. This is pretty easy to set up. You can use Trustlines for your time banking system just by using the Hours network, the Hours currency network. And you could set it up as a totally decentralized time bank, or you could also set it up to mirror your existing centralized time bank setup, and doing that on Trustlines is really cool because then it would automatically allow you to connect to other time banks and other, and the rest of the decentralized time bank as well. So how about gift vouchers? There are, this is pretty relevant nowadays because there are a lot of restaurants and businesses struggling right now due to the various lockdowns. And one thing they've been doing to raise money is to sell gift vouchers. So a cool idea with Trustlines is you could use Trustlines as a way to record your gift vouchers. And this has this added effect where it using Trustlines sort of exponentially expands the reach of your gift vouchers because you can do multi-pop payments with Trustlines. So that's, I think, one of the really interesting use cases. Then here we've got microcredit. You might have heard of projects like Kiva or Grameen Bank or something. This is generally known as like one way to fight poverty is to give people access to loans in very small amounts. And you can use Trustlines as a way to mark these loans. You could also, use Trustlines as a way to allow people to access or store micro savings. So micro credit and micro savings are kinds of two sides of the same coin. And you can also, of course, use Trustlines for your community currency. You can do this in a variety of different ways. So you can, like, one thing that you can do is use your local currency denomination, in your country, whatever that is. You could also create a custom denomination for your community. It could be something silly like a balloon or a baguette, but it could also be something that your community really cares about, like kilowatt hours. And this leads me to the next use case, which is the circular economy. So Trustlines is probably the ideal tool for payments in a circular economy, and that's because it's a system of mutual credit. So payments naturally in a sustainable circular economy, you want to create these sustainable economic loops where each person is trading something with the next person. And Trustlines is a system of mutual credit, so it naturally achieves that. You can encourage this type of behavior and these types of payments by setting different social rules on how Trustlines is used, and that can be set up differently depending on the community.
How well would you say that could scale? Would you say that like a nation state could start using Trustlines for a circular economy?
Interesting. I mean, if I would be very interested to see how it would work. So I guess this sort of feeds into the next section, which is like a global monetary system. And so I'd be interested to see a very large community, like a nation state, adopt Trustlines all at once, because it would be like Trustlines very naturally, it can be used as a global monetary system, but it very naturally allows all the same benefits that you get from using a local currency system or even like a hyper-local currency system. And that's because there's sort of these conceptual borders or boundaries between different natural trusted communities that emerge out of the credit limits that people set for each other. And so depending on whether or not you, like how each community sets up the rules around how they use Trustlines, like whether they're allowed to cash out for national currency or not, for example, that would influence, that would influence the circulation, or that would influence what the actual economy would look like in those communities. So should I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next one is let systems, or local exchange trading systems. These are one popular type of alternative exchange system or community currency system. And you could use Trustlines to mimic exactly what happens under a let system. Let system is, in a way, they're centralized. So usually everyone in the community is on the same ledger, they're, how do I say this? They're connected to a central account. And Trustlines is decentralized. So you could take your existing Let's community and recreate the exact same thing on Trustlines if you'd like, or you could take the same principle and just do a decentralized version. Either way, Trustlines as a technology makes it really easy for anyone to start a Let's system based on those principles. And you could also use Trustlines for a trade exchange network, or sometimes called a Barter Network. And this is just the same principle with several businesses might band together and use, in case there's a shortage of national currency or something like that, they want to continue trading with each other. You can have a group of businesses start using these trade credits in order to keep the economy going. And there are a couple of famous examples of that, like the Via Bank in Switzerland and Sardex in Italy. But basically, these are somewhat centralized models, just like the Let systems. And with Trustlines, you would be able to set up, use the same concept of mutual credit, but do it in a 100% decentralized way. So that means a lot less, it would just be a lot easier for any business that wanted to join something like this or start something like this to do it, to just take initiative and do it.
Do you think this would be possibly something that could help businesses still operate during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I wouldn't. Definitely. I mean, the COVID pandemic is also a lot more complex. We have a lot more problems besides just shortage of national currency. But yeah, I think for sure if we had trade exchange networks, if we had these relationships to fall back on, that would be really valuable, I think, to a lot of small business owners and large ones too. So next on the list, we've got degrowth money. You could also call it demurrage money or negative interest money. But we're basically, this concept would be if you have a type of money that has a negative interest rate on it, or if you have a credit relationship where the credit has a negative interest rate attached to it. And you could look at this in a few different ways, but the general idea, or some of the thought behind it, is that having a negative interest rate on your currency that you're using acts as a disincentive for hoarding. So it helps encourage people to spend their money, and it can be also looked at as a tool for degrowth. You could also, so this is also maybe one of my favorite applications of Trustlines, is you could use it as a totally decentralized universal basic income distribution system. And normally, if you want to distribute a basic income to a bunch of people, you'd have to do KYC. You need them to have identity documents, usually government distributed identity documents, and they also need bank accounts. And it's something like the people who need this the most don't necessarily have these things. So Trustlines would be this totally decentralized way to distribute a basic income. And all you have to do, so it's a kind of a tricky thing to think about, but you could technically put a predefined limit on each user's net negative balance and grow that amount over time, and that would act the same way as like that limit itself would be the level of basic income that you're paying out to each person. Yeah, this is not something that we have implemented, but it's just an idea for how you could use Trustlines. Right, and I should say that the fault tolerance of Trustlines as a system is implicitly what limits the basic income to 1 per person. That would be the general idea behind using Trustlines for something like this. So I think this is our last one. You could do collateralized credit. And so we put that in because Trustlines is, at its core, it's a way that it's agnostic to collateral. You specifically don't need any collateral or any resources whatsoever in order to start using Trustlines and to transact using just credit. However, if you want to add collateral, and you might do this in order to create a credit relationship with someone who might not trust you otherwise with one, and this can boost trade in the system, boost liquidity. So if you want to do that, you can totally do that. There's nothing stopping you. And it would be probably helpful in certain implementations of Trustlines, depending what you want to do. So I kind of rushed through that, but I hope it was a good overview, and you can go ahead and take a look at this page and reach out to us or to me if you have any more questions or suggestions for other use cases. Thanks.
Yes, it was a very nice intro. Thank you, Elisa. So you can find all these, the whole page with everything at the Trustlines docs.trustlines.network if you want to learn more about this. And there's some other content there as well for you to have a look at. So now we'll move over. We'll move over to Daniel and Thomas presenting their first pilot project for the Trustlines grants. But maybe, Elisa, you can give a quick overview of this chapter thing before that.
Well, we are looking into creating Trustlines chapters, and what should I say? A chapter model is something which there's an organization that has a certain goals, certain tools that they want to use to achieve some sort of vision, and then each chapter is autonomous. It's independent, but it's affiliated still with the group, and you can share resources. And so basically, we've been working on a chapter model for Trustlines. So if you want to create your own Trustlines community, then you could start a Trustlines chapter. And that's the idea we're working on now. We're working on creating a set of toolkits for anyone to use to make this process easier. And we're really looking to have this be a collaborative process. So if you're interested in getting involved, we welcome that. We really need that. So yeah, that's the introduction to the concept of chapters. And I'm very excited to say that we're working with this very accomplished team in Caracas, who I would pass the mic to now.
Yes. Thanks, Elisa. Can you guys hear me well? One of the issues of being in Caracas is more often than not connectivity issues. So maybe I can try at some point to turn on my camera, but for now I'm going just to be audio. just taking the safe approach. Anyway, so yes, I mean we are basically testing the idea of of having this local community. We already had some communities ourselves as a team. We are 3 people. So you already briefly met Thomas, who is an anthropologist, and he's focused on his work in terms of communications, and so he's mainly taking the lead in terms of localizing how we communicate Trustlines. And we had Adriana, who is basically, she's a connoisseur in terms of governance models, and she's basically right now our own de facto methodology dictator. So yes, and myself. And something interesting about Adriana and the spaces that we are exploring to run these pilots is that she holds. I mean, she started one of the first civic innovation labs down here in Caracas. And so this is a geographic space, and I'm gonna go into more detail on this. And myself, I started Ethereum Caracas, and I started like Singularity University's local chapter and the local B Corps community. So these are other kinds of communities. I mean, not necessarily geographically based. So I'll go into this a little bit. And you gave me a lot of ideas, Alisa, as well. But I wanted to provide at least some general context in terms of what goes on in Venezuela and Caracas at first, before we, frame how we are going to go through the pilots. But Venezuela, as you might have heard, is very, I mean, we are at the top of inflation rates right now, which is not exactly a title you want to hold. So, for example, the International Monetary Fund is predicting a 15,000% year-end inflation for 2020, and these kinds of things are, I mean, like this is mostly the thing like people associate Venezuela with. But just as well, like it is very tricky in terms of having access to cash money down here. So we had a couple of facts around that. Like, for example, like recent studies show that 60+% of the transactions out here are done in foreign currency. So you had a lot of people transacting with USD and transacting with several apps tied to the US dollar. And just as well, like there was a recent conversation by the government and local banks of dollarization, which is something that has been discussed in Venezuela for a long time. But thinking about the local bills, there was a recent plan to print a $100,000 Bolivar bill, which is still like 0.15 cents of a dollar. So it's not exactly something you can use to, do anything really. Not even pay for like a local bus ride, or I mean, it's these kinds of things, are messy, and just as well as lots of complexity in terms of payments ease. These payments take a lot of time, regardless of using USD cash bills. It's about 2 minutes just to do a very normal transaction. So some of the work I've been doing, like with local fintechs, we had this kind of pillars that support like their narrative that we have in local fintech space. So one of the things is like unstable economies cannot be treated with band-aids. So these out-of-the-box solutions or white label solutions. So just the importance of the aspect of localization is very big, and the aspect of localization in terms of the use and the narrative of how these products are used. And just as well that there is a very complex web to get from A to B when you have money in X space and you want to have it in like a local bank. And I don't know, it's the amount of transactions and the amount of fees that get one on top of the other in terms of, for example, remittances, which is something that people associate Venezuela a lot with right now. because we had like around 5.2 million Venezuelan migrants, and it's actually called the VenSit, the Venezuelan situation in Latin America. So this is just to provide context. Of course, we could we could go into more facts and discuss these kinds of things, but it's not the space. So based on based on our engagement with Trustlines, we had some pilot hypotheses. Because at first we were just exploring how to apply Trustlines to our own communities that I was briefly mentioning, but we took a step back and we had these hypotheses that we're going through. So one of them is like these communities that share a purpose. They had a shared purpose, and they are usually individual membership networks. So some of the ones I mentioned that I helped kickstart, like Ethereum Caracas or Singularity or the Vouchers network, which actually, when you mention like circular economy, that's something that, yes, you know, but yeah, and just as well, trade exchange networks, that's something like really caught my attention as well. But just thinking about, for example, there is another logic to approach a shared narrative and a shared purpose is, for example, the logic of the diaspora of Venezuelans, maybe not the current migrants that we had, but other parties. So the logic of the global monetary system actually could be interesting, but these are just some options. I mean, in terms of like a specific type or I don't want to say target, or yes, let's say user. So beneficiary, that is the word I was looking for. Yes, one specific type of beneficiary. So one conversation we had like ongoing right now is with Civic Innovation Lab as well, that I helped start like back in 2017, which is the Civic Lab of Nonviolent Protest. So this is mostly a grassroots network that interacts with a lot of other local grassroots networks. And the conversation that we had is around a time bank. So that is potentially where we're going first. But we are also having this other logics on how to approach this. And the other logic is geography-based communities. So this is way more complex because we had like on top of understanding community and having people achieve consensus on local issues and local opportunities. I mean, we were just discussing like if we're talking about geography in terms of the building, a residential building, so the verticality and the, let's say, the share issues are very common. But when we think about a more open space, like Adriana's Civic Innovation Lab is in a more open space, the complexities pile up because connectivity issues and diversity of problems with different services and different potential opportunities are way more variable and way more diverse. So that is something that we are not approaching like with a lot of energy right now. We're mostly thinking about the shared purpose at first, and different non-geography base is thinking about, for example, NGO, non-governmental associations or organizations, networks. So there are there is a lot of conversations going on in Venezuela, sign out and say this is here, but there is a lot of conversations around Venezuela around solidarity networks that just spur out of a lot in local NGO associations. And there are like contact with that we call engage. So this called I mean the first approach with the civic lab of nonviolent protest could eventually lead to, that is something that we had in mind. And as I mentioned a little bit of the team, right now our short-term goals are basically continue to give off with more strength this first pilot and just continue to improve and get our hands dirty again. I don't know if Thomas, you want to say any comment on this, or you guys had any questions?
No, I think you did great. You have pinpointed exactly what we have in mind, but just wanted to say that it's the first step to test the waters on the application of Trustlines as a solution. And we have several other ideas that once we've started working on the first pilot, we can settle down and check if those are viable as well, including the use of trust lines, not only for people like regular people, but also for organizations that share a space of co-working and can exchange between them services and time of and certain hours of services a month. But we will find out as soon as we can start getting our hands dirty first, and we are very excited to do so.
So what have been the first steps for your project so far?
What, sorry, Tatu?
What have been the first steps for your project so far?
Well, basically, it started with me, and I kind of got Adriana and Thomas excited about this. We've been mainly just mapping a lot and going through a lot of the documentation that you guys have shared. So, for example, what Alisa presented today is very helpful for us. So I'm mainly just starting like these small conversations, like with some of these potential pilots and access to the Civic Innovation Lab of Nonviolent Protest. But there are others that we have to better communicate what Trustlines is and the potential benefit. I mean, it has been very iterative, and we had gotten a lot of feedback from people so far, like better shape this.
You're breaking up a little there on the end, missed that.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
So how would you, is something like the fintech, is that something that Venezuelans are commonly used to currently? Are like people using mobile apps or alternatives right now already?
Yes, yes. I could I could go in depth on that, but basically, when we talk about like a lot of like 60+% of transactions done in foreign currency, inside that more than sell transactions, and Venezuelans use it for basically everything. So I can talk from experience. I go to the supermarket and buy groceries and pay with Zelle. I pay my rent with PayPal, for example, and sometimes I get a delivery of, I don't know, a pizza or whatnot, and I pay with Venmo. So you know, these aren't apps that were meant for me. So done on these apps. So other apps have apps as well. Uphold is one that made a lot of noise. RTM, which is basically, it's not fully decentralized, but it's and just as well reserved. These are a few of the ones that made waves at some moment in time. RTM was it's basically just in the last couple of months, it made a lot of noise because it was adopted by when you get in the political space, the local government goes very, very aggressively against them, depending on how they promote themselves. But it's something apart from the rest, because this hasn't happened with others, and we haven't really had like government problems with sale. So you can find them in the main retail chains of Venezuela. So this is very diverse, and there are local players.
Daniel, we sadly cannot follow what you're saying anymore because your connection is not good enough anymore.
It's starting to drop. Well, first and foremost,
that serve the market, and their potential, for example, for Trustlines.
Yes, thank you both for joining us very much. We hope to hear from you more later on. And as per usual, we'll do a AMAs, Ask Me Anything, where we will also answer questions from the community. Feel free to post questions for Daniel or Tomas as well in the YouTube chat. One thing to mention is head on over to trustlines.foundation if you also want to check out the grants program page, which is now there. And right now, we have one question at the chat. How UBI on Trustlines is different from Circle's UBI? Aliza, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, so we actually don't have a UBI implemented, or a UBI currency network implemented on Trustlines yet. I can say right off the bat that Circles, as it is currently implemented, does not allow you to set credit limits. So that's one way that it is concretely different, but it's, in my opinion, conceptually very similar under the hood. Yeah, and I hope that answers the question.
Let's hope so. I think so.
I think, yeah, Circles is also an evolving project, I think. So maybe they would become more similar to Trustlines over time too. I'm not sure. I consider Trustlines to be a very, very agnostic platform that you could use to build a lot of different things. And so Circles would be like something that you could build using Trustlines.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything to add to that. So that's it. Right now, we don't have any more questions. We can wait a minute if we get some. In the meantime, I can remind you to check out blog.trustlines.network, subscribe for all the latest news as they get posted. Follow Trustlines Foundation on Twitter. Join the discussions at forum.trustlines.network. You can also always post your questions ahead of time there for the monthly community calls. And we got another question. This is also from Farsad. What do you think will be the base currency for Venezuelans on Trustline's network? Their own Venezuelan currency? This Thomas or Daniel, perhaps?
Wow, that's a good question. No, I don't think the Venezuelan Bolivar will be the main one. I had a lot of personal high hopes for time in that sense. People already do a lot of bartering, but it's more complex to understand like what will make a specific currency around that. The logic of potential like a local currency that people could exchange that we can create inside Trustlines might be, well, I don't know. I feel very attracted to that as well. But yes, that is something that we will find out. Thomas, you want to add anything?
Just like before, I think you're on point. The most important word when working in Venezuela is uncertainty, and that uncertainty is specifically around the bolivar, so or the national currency. So the solution is to lessen the effects of uncertainty. It cannot be based on the bolivar because it moves every day, at least 3 times a day in value. So yeah, as Daniel said, we want to explore first time as currency because it's something that we Venezuelans do a lot. We exchange favors, we exchange services, and time is the main factor in deciding which favors and services we exchange with others. So yeah, that's where we're heading.
Do you see that in the future the bolivar will have any use anymore? Will it be faded out and just something else used instead, or is there still a future for it?
It's difficult to say, but personally, I will say the Bolivar has to go. I mean, like, and there was recently a comment, an open comment by a local, I guess one of the main political economists, Jose Guerra, mentioning this that it won't make sense for a new government to come and further devaluate the Bolivar. So exploring new options seems to be the just as well the commentary on the opposition interim government. I don't know, and even if the current Maduro's government is having conversations about around dollarization, I will say like from the civic perspective and from these two powers, it seems that the Bolivar is yes has potentially its dates count. Um, Thomas, you want to add on that?
As I said before, it's too much uncertainty, and the only reason people continue to use bolivars is because of the restraints of participating in a worldwide economy, like not being bancarized in the U.S. So the bolivar has become kind of like the token instead of the fiat, and people tend to um, have their savings in another currency and just exchange them to bolivars when they are about to spend it. They don't tend to keep bolivars for anything. Uh, so will it continue to live? I think it will continue to live for a while, but in terms of usability and real life, it would only leave us an imposed payment method that will be replaced as soon as another one is available, which is what Daniel said earlier, like 60% of all transactions are being made in USD. So as long as new alternatives come up, the Bolivar will be displaced.
Okay, thank you. That we'll hope to see something come up in Venezuela where you can have a more stable financial system. Right now, we do not have any more questions, so I'm gonna thank everyone for participating, especially Daniel and Tomas for joining us. And as mentioned, hope we'll see more from you in the future. Uh, be sure to subscribe to the Foundation YouTube channel for the following monthly community calls. Next one will be the last one this year, so be sure to check out that. And with that,